what does all this research mean for real-life sleep-deprived parents who are juggling the late nights, the early mornings, juggling tasks, decision fatigue, errands, emotional labor, and trying to remember literally everything? Are you thinking, could I take creatine for brain power? And so here's how to interpret the science. Creatine may help provide a buffer from short-term cognitive stress. Welcome to the Wellness That Fits podcast, where we help busy moms eat well, restore energy, and clear brain fog without sacrificing family time or your sanity. I'm Cassie Groeschl, registered dietitian and mom of 3. I believe wellness should fit your real life, not the other way around. If you're tired of complicated wellness trends and want simple, sustainable strategies for meal prep, holistic nutrition, and time-saving routines, you're in the right place. Let's jump in. Today, we're talking about something many of us feel every day: brain fog, working memory lapses, and executive overload, especially when we're sleep deprived, juggling work, family, and life in general. So today, we're going to talk about what creatine is, all the hype around it and brain function, what the research actually says about it, and practical ways to support cognition when life feels and gets exhausting. So let's dive in. Okay, so like I said, we're going to talk about what creatine is, where it comes from. We're going to talk about how much is used in research for brain benefits. We're going to talk about some real life application and how to maybe determine if creatine would work for you, and maybe some other solutions if you feel like it wouldn't work for you. All right, so what is creatine? Where does it come from? Creatine is a naturally occurring compound in the human body, and it's primarily stored in skeletal muscle, but it's also found in the brain. It plays a critical role in cellular energy metabolism by helping to regenerate ATP, which is the body's energy currency, during periods of high demand. So in simple terms, creatine helps cells refuel quickly, especially when they're stressed or overworked. So creatine is found naturally in foods like animal products, so red meat, pork, fish. And so to give you a little bit of an example of how much is in these products, there is about 1.8 to 2 grams of creatine per pound of red meat. And so if you were having like a regular 4-ounce-ish portion size, you're getting probably 0.5 grams of creatine or less. And in salmon, it's like 2 grams of creatine per pound, so very similar to red meat. Now, there's 0 creatine in plant foods, so just keep that in mind. So the amount that you get from food is going to be relatively small. Because of this, many people take supplements, usually creatine monohydrate, to raise levels more significantly in the body and the brain. And so your body actually does make about 1 gram per day. And this is from amino acids in your liver and your kidneys. And so between food and internal production, most women get about 1 to 2 grams of creatine per day, and that's total without supplements. And so we're going to take a look at what the studies show us, but when we're thinking about dosage, most of the studies on creatine, and at least in the brain, because I know a lot of people are familiar with creatine and muscle and bulking, and creatine's use in exercise and bodybuilding, and those are well known. But in terms of brain benefits, we're going to talk more about that research today. So most cognitive and fatigue studies are using about 3 to 5 grams per day, and there's a couple that use a lot higher, like 5 to 20 grams per day, and that's more so in stress or sleep-induced studies. And so that's twice or 3 times or more the amount than what we're getting in our diet and what our body is producing combined. Okay, so you've probably seen headlines like creatine is not just for bodybuilders anymore, or creatine can boost your brain. And that hype stems from research showing that creatine may improve memory and processing speed. And it might support brain energy metabolism, especially under stress or low sleep situations. So, but is it as good as companies claim? And so we're going to get into that research today, because I've looked into this extensively because I am a sleep-deprived parent and mom, and I have frequently looked into the research to determine what specifically I can do to improve my cognitive performance and the executive functioning and all those things when I am sleep deprived. We're going to talk about now the mechanism of action, so how creatine actually works in the brain. At a cellular level, creatine helps recycle ATP via the phosphocreatine system. So this is especially important in brain regions with high energy demand like the prefrontal cortex. That is the area that's managing working memory, planning, attention, problem solving, executive function. So during stressful times like sleep deprivation, your brain cells have to work a lot harder to maintain performance. And creatine can help sustain energy that's available to your brain by buffering ATP demand. It can preserve cellular metabolism when you're under, and it can possibly modulate neurotransmission. Now, this makes it a mechanistically plausible target for cognitive stress, but evidence matters more for real world recommendations. And so we're now going to get into the research on creatine and cognition specifically. So I went into the research and I broke down some of the major studies looking at specifically creatine and brain function and getting into memory, cognitive research, and then there is some sleep deprivation research that I looked at. All right, so we're first gonna talk about creatine and cognitive function in general. All right, I'm gonna first start with studies that were done a while ago, a couple decades ago, and then I'll bring it more towards recent research that has been done in this area. So a study that was done by Ray et al. In 2003 looked at 45 young vegetarian adults. Now, remember I said there's zero creatine in plant foods, so just keep that in mind. And so they looked at those 45 young vegetarian adults and they supplemented with 5 grams of creatine a day for 6 weeks. And it did show improvements in working memory and reasoning versus placebo. Now, I actually did a episode on working memory and executive functioning. And so it's one of maybe the third or fourth podcast episode that I did. So I would go back and listen to that because I explain a little bit more about working memory and some of these cognitive things that are studied in a lot of the research that I'm looking at. And so working memory, just to give you a quick example, working memory is like when somebody gives you a list of numbers and then you need to remember those numbers, but then also utilize that in something. So for example, multi-factor authentication is one thing that comes to mind where you're given a set of numbers. Usually people just copy and paste it. But if you were to do this, if you were to actually practice with your brain and memorize a set of numbers and then plug it in somewhere else. So that's kind of an idea of working memory, taking information that you recently learned and then applying it pretty quickly afterward. Maybe not instantly seconds later, but within the same day for sure. So that's working memory. So what this study found in 2003 is that in vegetarian adults, supplementation with 5 grams a day did improve working memory and reasoning versus the placebo. Now, moving on, in 2011, Tin and Dunho did a study and they supplemented with 20 grams per day for 5 days. It was on, and they looked at a number of individuals, but what they found was that vegetarians showed some memory gain versus placebo, whereas the other ones did not. And so again, showing that if you're not getting creatine through your diet, there might be some better results in working memory in those populations that might be missing the creatine from the diet. Again, your body naturally produces it. It is not an essential nutrient. Your body does produce it. But for those people who may not be getting enough through their food, that is where we're seeing supplementation with creatine is more beneficial. Okay. And then I also looked at a couple studies in 2023 and 20. So Prokopidis et al. In 2023 reviewed 10 randomized controlled trials, and they did find some improvements in memory with creatine supplementation. When they looked at the randomized controlled trials, because there were like 10 different ones, the dosage varied greatly. And so some of the studies were using 2 grams, some of them closer to 20 grams per day. And this was usually over a period of time. So anywhere from 5 days to 24 weeks. So a huge range of dosage, huge range of timeline here, but they did show some improvements in memory. And benefits were strongest in older adults, and the older adults being like 66 to 76, they found. All right, and then study by Zhu et al. In 2024 examined 16 randomized control trials and total 492 people, so a significant amount of people. And it reported significant gains in memory, attention time, and processing speed, though not on generalized cognition across all tasks. And so more so, again, looking at memory, attention, and processing speed. Okay. And then the last one I want to talk about, and this was done in 2023 by Sandkuhler et al., and they supplemented with 5 grams per day for 6 weeks. This was in 123 adults, and they did find an improvement in working memory tasks, though not all cognitive measures changed. So working memory and memory seem to be a common thread here in terms of what creatine supplementation can do. And then lastly, I just want to point out that I did see a study that was done in 2028 by Rawson et al., and they had supplementation of 2 to 3 grams per day for 6 weeks. This was done in healthy young adults, and it actually showed no significant cognitive benefits. And when you read about creatine and you see usually the supplementation is a little bit higher, like the 5 grams, it's usually based on these studies that show that supplementation at 2-3 grams is not really giving us significant benefits, but rather those studies that are showing 5 grams or more per day are the ones that are showing more of an improvement in working memory and some other cognitive tasks. So bottom line here, creatine can benefit memory and processing speed in some groups, particularly the older adults and vegetarians, and probably those with lower baseline creatine, and can benefit tasks with high working memory demand. But the effects aren't universal across all cognitive domains. Like I said, it's more on that working memory and some attention. All right, now we're going to transition into creatine and sleep deprivation because this is what I've been hearing a lot about recently. And I think here's where it gets really particularly interesting for busy sleep deprived listeners, parents, moms like myself who just want a little bit of help, whether it be through food or supplementation when we have those nights of kids waking up and kids that are sick and a number of other reasons why we might be sleep deprived. All right, so again, sleep deprivation and creatine. So the ones I looked at 2006 by McMorris et al., they did a high amount of supplementation. So they did 20 grams per day for 7 days. They preloaded it. So they did this for 7 days prior to sleep deprivation. And they also had some mild exercise weaved in there. And what they showed was that creatine attenuated decline in executive and motor tasks after 24 hours of no sleep. And so what this pretty much shows is there wasn't as much of a decline in executive and motor tasks after high supplementation of 20 grams for 7 days. And then they were sleep deprived or 24 hours of no sleep. And then they looked at the results afterward. And then secondary analyses from that study suggested selective enhancement of complex executive tasks after prolonged wakefulness with creatine. And so then there wasn't as much in the literature, certainly in terms of rats and mice, but I specifically look at human trials when I'm making recommendations and looking at making changes in my own life. And I looked at the study that was done in 2024. This was by Gordy Nahad et al. I'm probably botching the name. And they were looking at previously done studies on creatine, and just based on some previous knowledge of how creatine is taken up in the brain and in other cells, they felt that a lot of the research had been done over a period or prolonged amount of time, like weeks. And so they wanted to figure out if higher dose of creatine would show favorable effects within like days or within a short amount of time instead of supplementing for 6 weeks of creatine. And then is it showing improvement? They wanted to look at sleep deprivation, high doses, and what is it doing in a short period of time. Okay. So they're looking at 25 to 30 grams of creatine supplementation, and they're looking at people during 21 hours without sleep. And they found that there was improved processing speed and cognitive performance, plus some other brain energy markers that they looked at. Now, something to keep in mind, because I think a lot of people quote this study, is that this was done on 15 healthy subjects. And while this is very, very interesting and promising, we do have to keep in mind that this was done on 15 people and not hundreds or thousands of people. All right, so I think this is a really important takeaway from the study, and I'm taking this directly from the conclusion section. It can be concluded that creatine has the potential to be used in prolonged cognitive activity during sleep deprivation. And then the study does show that the dose of creatine, when we're talking about sleep deprived deterioration in cognitive performance, lasting up to 9 hours and showing its maximum cognitive effect at 4 hours after oral administration. Future research needs to investigate the appropriate dose and determine more accurately the time point at which creatine reaches its maximum effect. So I summarized some of that, but some of those words were directly taken from that research paper by Gorgi Nehad et al. Done in 2024, again, looking at high doses. So I think the important thing in the main takeaway in sleep deprivation is that creatine may help sustain certain facets of cognition, especially processing speed and complex tasks under extreme sleep loss. But most research is preliminary, small, like I said, 15 healthy subjects, and not yet replicated at large scale. And so something to keep in mind, because I always want to take this research and make it applicable to our own lives. So, what does all this research mean for real life sleep deprived parents who are juggling the late nights, the early mornings, juggling tasks, decision fatigue, errands, emotional labor, and trying to remember literally everything? Are you thinking, could I take creatine for brain power? And so here's how to interpret the science. Creatine may help provide a buffer from short-term cognitive stress. And we're mostly looking at high acute doses, like 20 grams or more, and that's during severe sleep loss. And it's showing that it can help with processing tasks in controlled studies. Again, some of those participant numbers were really low, so you have to keep that in mind. And what we also have looked at in the research is that daily doses, like 5 grams a day over several weeks, may benefit working memory and processing speed in some people. And so, again, a lot of the studies don't look at creatine supplementation after months and months and months. We know from research done more so on muscle building is that it is safe. And but we're really looking at brain function. And so we do know that over several weeks it could help working memory and processing speed in some adults. And again, especially for those people who are probably low on creatine at baseline, like older adults and vegetarians. So now there are some caveats I want to discuss. Effects are not universal. Some studies show no benefit in healthy, well-rested young adults. There are other things I'm going to talk about in a minute that we can recommend for that brain performance that we know we have thousands of research papers on, or thousands of participants in these research papers that show a benefit. Another caveat, long-term cognitive benefits from creatine outside of specific tasks like that working memory and attention have not yet been conclusively proven. So while creatine may be a tool, it's not a magic bullet, especially when real life involves chronic, repeated sleep loss and multitasking demands. That is an area that we need to look further into and determine what we can do to improve those chronic sleep loss patterns and the reason why our executive functioning is failing us. And so what else supports brain health that is backed by large research? So if creatine isn't yet the definitive answer to everyday cognitive resilience, we have to ask ourselves, what does reliably improve memory, executive function, and overall brain health? And so I looked into the research, And so what we do know is that exercise is the most powerful non-pharmacological brain booster, meaning we don't have to take a pill. Exercise is the answer to cognition and to overall better performance, working memory, attention span. And I want to specifically bring up a massive umbrella meta-analysis that was done on 2,724 randomized controlled trials. And that's just trials, right? So thousands of randomized controlled trials looking at 258,000 participants. And they found that any type of exercise, even light intensity, improved general cognition, memory, and executive function. And benefits appear usually within 1 to 3 months of activity. And this is huge. This is the data on real humans across ages, across contexts that we can actually make recommendations based on. So why exercise? What is it really doing? It boosts blood flow to the brain. It increases brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is BDNF, and it enhances neural efficiency and connectivity. And then it also reduces overall inflammation, whether that's neuroinflammation in your brain or inflammation throughout the rest of your body, and it reduces stress. So we know those things are associated with better cognitive function. Even walking, yoga, Tai Chi, any of those things have benefits for cognition. So it doesn't have to be CrossFit or something really extensive to count. It can be something as simple as walking. Okay, what else can we do? That's exercise. Sleep. I know we have a hard time getting enough sleep. I am one of those people. I'm raising my hand here. Sleep is the real king of cognitive function. Sleep quality is clearly linked with working memory and executive functioning. A study of middle-aged and older adults found that better sleep quality correlated with better working memory and self-rated memory ability. And what we're finding is, even with exercise, chronic sleep loss may erode potential cognitive benefits, according to longitudinal findings. So sleep is really important, and sleep is the time your brain consolidates memories, it clears metabolic waste, it restores neural circuits, it refreshes emotional regulation, and honestly, no supplement can fully replace those functions. No supplement is going to replace getting adequate sleep. So exercise, wonderful. Sleep, wonderful. Keep in mind that you can be exercising a ton and not getting enough sleep, and we're still going to see that it's not going to have as much of an effect on cognitive function if you are not sleeping well. Other lifestyle factors, research also points to associations between episodic memory and social activity, leisure engagement, higher physical activities, we covered that, and then overall better sleep habits. So really the other lifestyle factors would be like in finding a hobby and enjoying it, and then social activities, so being with and around other humans. These factors all correlate with better cognitive health in large population studies, even over years of research done, right? This isn't like a 6-week trial with this amount of dose, right? It is done in large populations over an extended period of time. So what are our final takeaways? Creatine has promise, especially under metabolic stress like acute sleep deprivation, but the evidence is still emerging and nuanced. What we don't know is those parents and people who are depriving themselves of sleep over years and years and years and years, is creatine helping? We don't know. All we know is that creatine may help in high doses with some working memory tasks that are going to help you throughout the day. Exercise is a proven, scalable strategy to enhance memory and executive function across the lifespan. And it's backed by enormous data sets. Like I said, 250,000 people. So we know we can easily recommend this for cognitive function. Sleep quality remains a foundational driver of cognitive performance. And finally, I think just looking at this holistically, in that combining all of these things, proper sleep, regular movement, social engagement, and stress management is scientifically the most reliable path to better brain function. After that, I would say it really depends on the person's lifestyle and situation, because could creatine be used under certain circumstances to help manage those things, maybe especially in certain seasons? Sure, and it's promising. but we want to take a look at the individual as a whole, and we want to take a look at your lifestyle as a whole, because even with creatine supplementation in those larger 20-gram, 30-gram doses over a short period of time, we have no studies done on whether that's actually helping your memory and cognitive function if you continue to be deprived of sleep over an extended period of time. We don't have that research. And so why not focus on what we can control and what we can do for free, which is to try and get more sleep. And I know, as hard as that sounds, of course, and get more exercise. If those things are not put into your calendar as priorities for your general health, well-being, and non-negotiables, then you will suffer the consequences of cognitive decline. It's as simple as that. We need to put these things and schedule them as priorities into our calendar. So let's start simple. I mean, I wanted to challenge you to think about what could you do. And I know we all know we're supposed to get more sleep or have more consistent sleep schedules or exercise more. But I want you to really think about this and how you're going to add it to your calendar this week. We want to start with small daily actions, like even if it's 10 minutes of movement, 10 minutes of walking, or 20 to 30 minutes of movement, if you're already doing 10 minutes of walking, we want to, as best we can, aim for consistent bedtime routines. Again, I know this isn't always possible, especially when you have really young kids, but if you can start any sort of consistency, for me, what we have done in our family is I will set alarms on my phone. For example, 6:45, we are going to head upstairs, and 7 o'clock, we are going to get in rooms, get PJs on, start reading books, and then by 7:30, lights out, right? It's not always perfect. Of course not, especially in certain seasons. But if you can set alarms on your phone to help you carry out some of these small daily actions, I think that could at least bring awareness to it and eventually help form some of those habits. And then for yourself too, if you can create those consistent bedtime routines that especially support sleep. So set it and forget it, whatever it might be, whether it's an alarm on your phone for consistent bedtimes or consistent wake times. You set your thermostat to, 68 or lower for better sleeping conditions to come on at night. How can you improve sleep quality? Are you going to have a rule to have no screens an hour before bed? I know these things are talked about a lot, and it's really hard to implement them sometimes. But what small action can you take this week to just start your journey? Because little tiny actions can snowball over time. And pretty soon, with those little habits that you've built week by week over time, you look around yourself and you're thinking, well, this is the protocol that I once dreamed of. This was the protocol I wanted to do, but it just couldn't do everything at once. And so it's really important to even start with something so small as put your phone away outside of the bedroom somewhere so that you are not waking up to a phone right next to you or being tempted before you go to bed to a phone right next to you, because I know we can all aimlessly scroll. Okay, so other daily actions that you can take: engage in one social or leisure activity that stimulates your mind. My parents used to play cards all the time, and it would be normal for people to come over and play cards, a night of cards. And I would love to start that up again, because I think not only are you engaging in social activity, of course, by being around other people, but you're bettering your brain, and card games are something that can stimulate your mind. I love that idea. But if there's anything else that you can do, even if it's like game night, date night is game night, whatever you can do to help stimulate your mind and make it a non-negotiable in your schedule, that's really important. All right. And then those are some small daily actions that I want to challenge you to make this week. And lastly, consider creatine if you struggle with acute cognitive performance, especially after a night of not very good sleep and you can really feel it. Consider it also if you're looking for a possible energy buffer and you've tried the other things. And then also if you've, discussed it with a healthcare provider and you feel like it would work for you. But I think the main takeaway here is, have you tried incorporating more exercise? Have you tried a consistent sleep schedule and getting enough sleep at night? And if you haven't, please reach out. We can talk through a plan of what might work for you and what dosage. And and create any other lifestyle factors that might help with the cognitive function, executive function, and working memory and attention, things that might not be working very well in your life. All right, so thank you for listening to the Wellness That Fits podcast. If you learned something today, please share this episode with a friend who's burned out, overwhelmed, or just curious about brain health in general. So stay curious and let's take care of one of the most important organs we have, which is our brain. See you next time. Thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode of the Wellness That Fits podcast. I hope you walk away with simple, doable steps you can put into practice right away. If you loved this episode, it would mean the world if you subscribed, left a review, or shared it with another busy mom who could use some encouragement. Until next time, friends, keep creating wellness that fits your life.